When the world stood on the brink of World War III, missiles armed, nations divided, humanity seconds from extinction, something unimaginable descended from the skies over South Africa. A silent, massive alien saucer that halted the apocalypse without a word. What followed was not war, but something far more terrifying. As monstrous entities emerged and an ancient spiral deep beneath the earth awakened, humanity realized it was never alone and never in control. There are dates in human history when the sky seemed to hold its breath. Days when the silence felt heavier than war drums, when billions of hearts beat in synchrony with dread, watching clocks tick toward annihilation. Not with invasion, not with extinction, but with human hands pressing buttons in dark bunkers. A third world war had been simmering for years, shaped by betrayals, resource wars, and cascading alliances. The trigger was diplomatic, petty by historical standards, a failed assassination in Tel Aviv, attributed to Iran, denied by China, retaliated by France. Submarines were positioned. Satellites changed their alignments. Hundreds of missiles were armed beneath soil and sea. The world had gone mad with calculation, as if the apocalypse could be balanced in a spreadsheet. America's east coast was on alert. Russian silos began opening in Siberia. France initiated DEFCON 2 for the first time since the Cold War. Warnings blasted across news networks while people huddled in churches, subway stations, school basements, or simply stared blankly at their screens, knowing there was no true place to hide. Children were too young to understand, and the elderly were too tired to care. Soldiers on all sides were given the order, but no one had yet pulled the final string. And then the sky tore open. No sound, no warning, just presence, like something too vast to make noise. In the middle of the Kalahari Desert, South Africa, something descended. It didn't fall like a missile or emerge like a ship. It was just there, as if it had always been there and we had only just remembered to look. A circle in the clouds, vast as a capital city, shimmered with alien geometry. Underneath, dust was blown away in concentric rings. And at the center of it all was a floating object that defied comprehension. A black disk the size of Manhattan, perfectly symmetrical, hovering just above the Earth with no propulsion, no signal, and no declaration. All nuclear command systems across Earth went dark in the same second. Submarines powered down. Bunkers lost signal. Launch consoles blinked to static. Defense satellites shut off as if disconnected from power altogether. No explosion, no electromagnetic burst, just silence. Human weapons became useless, irrelevant. A single object had frozen the apocalypse. The first to see it up close were Bush pilots in Namibia who veered away in awe and panic. Then came drones, news helicopters, military jets. The object didn't react. It didn't fire, didn't scan, didn't communicate. It simply was. Governments ordered restraint. No one wanted to provoke something that had casually undone the world's deadliest weapons. Scientists speculated it was extraterrestrial. What else could it be? Religious figures claimed it was divine punishment. Billionaires fled to underground bunkers, then promptly lost contact. For 48 hours, the flying saucer remained still. And the world watched. Something began to shift in the air, not just weather or static, but a collective consciousness. People began gathering in front of screens again, but not for war. Footage of Chinese generals speaking calmly with American officers went viral. Russian commanders were seen shaking hands with NATO counterparts on aircraft carriers rerouted to the African coast. Soldiers from Iran and Israel helped evacuate South African villages together. Something impossible had entered Earth's skies, and for the first time in history, we were united not by ideology, but by fear and awe. Because it wasn't just technology, it was art. The saucer glowed faintly in shifting patterns like it was alive. Its surface bent light strangely, making it appear both smooth and textured, both solid and intangible. Satellite views showed no heat signature. Radar gave back nonsense. It wasn't cloaked, it simply refused to exist by our understanding. And through it all, it hovered above the same point, waiting. That single fact terrified military analysts more than anything else. The waiting. By the fifth day, the United Nations held an emergency session. For once, every nation was present. Words like unification, cooperation, defensive alliance replaced the usual posturing. The Kalahari object had not just disrupted a war, it had rewritten our priorities. Troops were rerouted from borders to form a joint task force. Supplies flowed into Namibia and South Africa. Drones no longer scouted for each other, they all pointed up. In the Namibian desert, makeshift camps sprouted in weeks. Flags from over 30 countries fluttered in dry wind. Tents, armored convoys, mobile labs, and satellites ringed the presence which had not moved an inch. Soldiers shared fire pits with those they would have shot a week before. Languages clashed and merged. Engineers argued over readings they couldn't explain. And every night, all eyes turned skyward toward the silent disk, reflecting the blood-orange sun. The world was not at peace, but it was no longer at war. The object had done what centuries of diplomacy could not. It had given us a single fear larger than each other. No one could predict what would come next, but we all knew it would be terrible. In the days that followed the arrival, Earth was no longer a planet of nations. It was a world with a single eye, all pupils dilated, focused unblinking towards South Africa. What began as military panic turned into scientific obsession. News channels no longer bothered with politics. No one cared about elections, economies, or borders anymore. The saucer had stolen the human gaze, and nothing else seemed worth discussing. From low orbit, satellite images showed the desert blooming, not with nature, but with industry. Hundreds of mobile units, cargo planes, dropship modules, and armored columns began moving into the region from every edge of the Earth. The Kalahari became the most surveyed place in human history. Yet no matter how many lenses were pointed at it, the object gave back nothing but shadows and distortion. It floated as still as a mountain, undisturbed by weather, immune to drones, and unresponsive to every probe. It gave no signals, no signs of life, no heat, no sound. It defied thermodynamics. It floated against gravity with no visible propulsion. It simply existed, and that somehow made it more terrifying than any weapon. Every failed scan only confirmed one thing: it was here on its own terms. And it was watching. International command centers were set up along the borders of Namibia and Botswana, transforming entire towns into strategic hubs. Walvis Bay, once a sleepy coastal town, became a naval dock for aircraft carriers bearing Chinese, American, and French insignia side by side. Windhoek's civilian airport was converted into a multinational logistics base. Johannesburg's skyline dimmed as its power was rerouted to military grids. Civilians fled, but not all. Some stayed out of defiance, faith, or curiosity. They pitched tents closer and closer to the saucer's shadow. Some called it a miracle, others a sign of end times. On the ground, the atmosphere in the joint camps was electric with tension. Language barriers became battlefield annoyances. Russian engineers argued with American radar teams. Iranian technicians refused to share readings with Israeli analysts. But even the harshest disputes ended with heads tilted toward the sky, because no one could understand it. Photographs leaked to the public only deepened the mystery. The saucer's surface wasn't metallic in the traditional sense. It shimmered with geometric veins that pulsed like bioorganic circuitry. Some images showed what appeared to be glyphs or alien symbols etched into its underbelly, but they never appeared the same twice. Different angles gave different impressions. Some observers claimed the surface changed shape when not observed directly. Conspiracy theories erupted like wildfires, but no one could explain the feeling people described when standing beneath it, that their thoughts weren't entirely their own, that the object knew it was being watched. Global security agencies classified the area as an active threat theater, yet not a single weapon had been fired by the saucer. Still, the world knew what this could be, what it must be. The calm before a storm. No one believed it had traveled across space to do nothing. Theories ranged from scientific missions to pre-invasion reconnaissance. A few dared to hope it was peaceful, but the silence made optimists sound like fools. The United Nations, for the first time in history, passed a unanimous emergency resolution under the Earth Survival Clause, an archaic protocol meant for existential threats like pandemics or asteroid collisions. From this motion, the United Earth Defense Command was born. UDC. Its insignia, a broken sword beneath a single eye. Its charter, total authority over all military and scientific operations in relation to the object. Every major power, China, America, Russia, the EU, India, Iran, Israel, contributed personnel, weapons, and data. And for once, not a single nation walked out of the room. General Omar Halleck of Egypt was appointed Supreme Commander of UDC operations. A seasoned leader known more for diplomacy than bloodshed, his first order was simple: do not engage the saucer under any circumstance. Let it speak first if it ever would. But not everyone shared his patience. Across the globe, extremist factions emerged. Some claimed the saucer was divine and must be worshipped. Others believed it was a harbinger of judgment. A splinter faction of ex-military radicals in the American Southwest even tried to launch a private missile. It was intercepted over the Atlantic by a Chinese destroyer, and no one questioned that decision. For a moment, Earth felt like a single species again. Yet below the surface, old distrust simmered. Intelligence agencies still spied on each other within the camps. Supplies were misplaced. Schedules accidentally sabotaged. The idea of unity was beautiful in press releases, but on the desert floor, the ghosts of old wars danced between shadows. And still, the saucer remained, imposing, unbothered. Then came the first anomaly. On the seventh day, a reconnaissance drone from the Indian Air Force veered too close to the saucer's lower edge. It didn't crash or vanish, it simply stopped. Mid-flight, with no loss of power, it hung frozen in midair like a puppet suspended by invisible strings. Its signal remained active. Video feed kept transmitting, but the drone no longer responded to controls. And in the background of the feed, just for a split second, observers saw something move along the saucer's underside. Something impossible. A shape that wasn't part of the hull. A ripple of movement. Organic. Within an hour, 22 countries had eyes on that footage. The camp command post erupted into chaos. Some wanted to send manned aircraft. Others called for satellite strikes. General Halleck held the line. He demanded stillness, patience, respect, and the object gave it. It released the drone. It simply let it go, gently, as if to say, "I saw you." That night, the clouds above the saucer turned violet. Lightning forked without thunder. A tremor rippled across the desert, too faint to register on seismographs, but every soldier and scientist felt it in their feet. Not an earthquake. Something deeper. A heartbeat. And in the dark, the object continued to float. Silent. Beautiful. Waiting. It was surreal how fast hatred turned into handshakes when the end of the world loomed over your head. In another timeline, one the world had been just minutes away from, these same nations would have reduced each other to radioactive ash. Soldiers who were trained to kill each other now stood shoulder to shoulder, eating from the same field kitchens, sharing cigarettes, language apps, and occasionally, stories they never thought they'd tell. For a moment in human history, war had been postponed. Not by diplomacy, but by terror. Real terror, the kind that made nations feel small and human egos even smaller. On the outskirts of the Kalahari, the joint base was rapidly expanding. Modular buildings unfolded like steel flowers. Water tanks were dropped in by helicopter. Medical tents bloomed in white rows. Command centers blinked with satellite feeds, and global military units began arriving in waves. It was no longer just a multinational camp. It had evolved into a living, breathing organism. Humanity's makeshift heart, beating on red sand and cracked stone. The soldiers came from everywhere. Americans in dust-covered tactical gear. Russian VDV troopers always in formation. French paratroopers sharing wine from tin cups. Chinese PLA units marching in perfect cadence. Israeli commandos, Iranian special forces, Indian cyber warfare techs, South Korean drone squads, each arriving with suspicion and pride. And slowly, with the discipline of soldiers and the weariness of those who had stared down annihilation, they began to cooperate. It started with the small things. A translator shared jokes between a Ukrainian sniper and a Pakistani medic. A British logistics officer shared a truck battery with a Brazilian convoy. South African rangers, familiar with the terrain, led orientation hikes for newly arrived units. Some interactions remain tense. Old wounds don't close just because a new threat arrives. But the saucer loomed high overhead, always watching, always silent. It was a constant reminder that whatever differences humans held, something far worse was out there. And it had come here. Inside the main operations center, known as the Dome, tension was measured in megabytes. Rows of analysts watched endless data streams from satellites, radars, EM scanners, and seismic monitors. Yet the object remained utterly passive. No energy spikes, no emissions, no signs of biological life. And that, more than anything, disturbed the scientific community. Nothing that large, that advanced, could just sit there doing nothing. Theories bloomed like fungi in the minds of those desperate for explanation. Some said the saucer was a probe waiting for a response. Others believed it was waiting for a signal from deep space. A few whispered that perhaps it had already received a signal and was waiting to act. But none of that mattered to the soldiers outside. They weren't there to speculate. They were there to shoot if it ever came to that. And many of them secretly hoped it wouldn't. In an abandoned weather station converted into a press bunker, journalists were beginning to arrive too. They were the quiet observers, the scribes of mankind's strangest chapter. Among them was a war photographer named Thomas Hale, a man who had captured bloodshed in Ukraine, famine in Sudan, and riots in Brazil. He came not to chase a story, but to watch history happen. His lens did not blink. He saw soldiers crying in the dark, commanders arguing in whispers, and children drawing aliens in the dust near refugee camps. His images would become icons, etched into memory, not just of horror, but of hope. But not all were convinced. In dark corners of the base, secret conversations began. Some military leaders saw opportunity. If they could understand the saucer's technology, the power it represented could change everything. Whispers of first contact dominance spread. What if this unity was temporary? What if, when the dust settled, the country that cracked the saucer's code would inherit the Earth? Alliances may shift, but ambition never dies. General Omar Halleck knew this. His face remained stoic, but inside, he feared his soldiers less than he feared the politicians. He had read too many briefings, seen too many closed-door agreements made without his input. He made it a rule that no one approached the saucer without clearance from every major participating nation. Every drone launch, every sensor ping, every ground survey had to be filed, signed, and confirmed. It was the only way to keep peace in this fragile miracle. Yet even as humanity stood united beneath the shadow of the unknown, old instincts scratched at the surface. Weapons were being smuggled, data hoarded, black sites were already being planned. And through it all, the object still floated, unmoving, unbothered, unbreakable. Then came the first direct message from the saucer. Not a signal, not a sound, but light. On the evening of the 11th day, as dusk fell over the desert, the saucer's surface began to pulse. Lines of light appeared like veins under skin, tracing perfect concentric patterns. Every scanner lit up with false readings. The sky above it shimmered, cast no heat, no radiation, but something changed in the air. Everyone felt it, a pressure in the chest, a vibration in the bones. Troops across the base stood still. Conversations froze. Radios fell silent. Even animals in the desert stopped moving. The saucer glowed brighter, and then it went dark again. No explanation, no message, no demand, just a single show of life, or awareness, or something we didn't have a word for. General Halleck said nothing that night. Neither did his commanders. But the next morning, dozens more nations signed the UEDC Charter. World leaders appeared side by side in a broadcast from Geneva, and the name of the project changed. It was no longer Operation Skywatch. It became Project Aegis, a shield for Earth, because now everyone knew the object wasn't just a visitor, it was a test, and humanity had just barely passed the first phase. The silence broke on day 12. Up to that point, the world had been holding its breath, waiting for answers, praying for peace, fearing the unknown. The saucer had remained motionless, a black eye in the sky, glowing only once and then going dark again. Some believed it would eventually leave. Some hoped it would land, open a door, and offer knowledge or warning. But no one was prepared for what it actually did. It started at 3:24 Greenwich Mean Time. A tremor not in the ground, but in the air itself. Invisible to radar, silent to the ear, but every animal for 50 kilometers scattered. Dogs in refugee camps whined and bolted. Birds took to the skies in chaotic flocks. Elephants in a nearby conservation reserve stampeded through fences as if running from ghosts. Machines didn't register it, but every living creature felt it in their bones. A ripple, a shift in something ancient and wrong. Then the saucer opened, not like a hatch or door. There was no visible seam, just a slow dilation at the very center of its underbelly, a round aperture that widened like an iris. Darkness lay inside, perfect bottomless darkness. And then, like fruit falling from a tree, the first object dropped. It was small at first, a faint glint of something metallic. But as it fell, it began to change, growing, folding outwards like origami in reverse. By the time it reached the clouds, it was the size of a house. By the time it reached the atmosphere, it was something else entirely. And then it hit the desert floor. No explosion. No shockwave. Just impact, solid, final, like a gavel striking the earth. Sand burst into the air. Cameras zoomed in. Troops flinched. Scientists held their breath. For a long moment, the object simply sat there, half buried in sand. A black, spiked pod, shaped like a seed but armored like a tank. Then it opened. From within poured creatures. They moved fast. Too fast. A blur of chitin, muscle, claws, and teeth. Some crawled. Some sprinted on 4 or 6 limbs. Others flew on silent, twitching wings. They didn't make noise, not at first. No roar, no screech. Just movement. Coordinated, purposeful, relentless. The first squad to respond was a mixed unit of French and Angolan infantry stationed on perimeter watch. They didn't have time to retreat. The creatures descended on them like a tide, ripping, tearing, dragging bodies into the sand. Gunfire erupted. Spotlights blazed. Sirens screamed across the base. The war had begun. General Halleck didn't hesitate. Protocol Red was declared. Entire sectors of the joint base mobilized instantly. Tanks rolled, drones launched, defensive grids powered up. And still, the creatures kept coming, not from the sky, but from the pod. It was still open, still birthing. Hundreds, maybe thousands. South African air units strafed the ground with 30mm rounds. Chinese railguns punched holes in the sand. Russian artillery pounded the pod's location with cluster shells. And for a brief moment, the onslaught seemed to work. Bodies flew. Alien blood splattered in arcs. The tide slowed. Until the second pod fell. Then the third. And the fourth. By sunrise, 15 pods had landed across a radius of 120 kilometers. Each one opened. Each one spilled monsters. And each one seemed tailored to the terrain it landed on. In rocky hills, they sent climbers. In open desert, sprinters. Near human positions, flying scouts. It wasn't just an attack. It was a strategy. The base was divided into 3 battlefronts by midday. Northridge, where most pods had landed. South Flats, a dry basin filled with refugees now overrun. And Central Command, still holding but under siege. And this was just the first wave. The creatures moved without communication, but never in chaos. They hunted in packs. They feinted, retreated, and returned. They knew where defenses were weak. They ignored machines and went straight for humans. They were not biomechanical. They bled. They died. But they killed far more than they lost. In the northern perimeter, an entire Indian mechanized division was wiped out in 2 hours. In the south, refugee convoys vanished from satellite feeds. At Central Command, every defensive turret was at full capacity, and still the lines were thinning. And through it all, the saucer remained silent. It didn't join the fight. It didn't support its soldiers. It simply hovered above the chaos, the great eye of the storm. Inside the dome, command staff scrambled to reorganize. General Halleck ordered air superiority maneuvers. Drones were redirected to strike pods before they could open. American B-2 bombers launched from Diego Garcia, flying low to avoid detection. European fighter wings joined in precision bombing. The 20th pod was destroyed midair. A cheer erupted in the command room. Finally, a tactical advantage. Finally, proof they could hurt it. But then the saucer responded. Not with weapons. Not with light. But with numbers. The sky darkened as the next wave dropped, this time, not pods. Them. Creatures fell like rain. Thousands. A swarm. And as they landed, they did not die. They unfolded. Some with wings, some with talons, some with no legs at all. It was no longer about containment. It was about survival. The war had begun in full. Thomas Hale, the war photographer, stood on a rooftop as the swarm descended. His camera clicked automatically, hands shaking, breath caught in his throat. He had captured wars, disasters, the worst of humanity. But this was not man-made. This was not politics or revenge. This was judgment. And in his lens, he saw what everyone feared to say aloud. Earth was not ready. By the morning of the 13th day, the Kalahari was no longer desert, it was war. What once had been an endless expanse of dry silence had become a canvas of blood and fire, etched with smoking trenches and cratered sand. The alien creatures had swarmed in numbers that defied logic, each wave more coordinated than the last. Tactical perimeters held for mere hours before collapsing. Defense grids blinked red across every sector. The United Earth Defense Command was no longer holding the line, they were falling back 1 meter at a time. Satellite images painted the truth clearer than any broadcast. The battlefront spanned over 200 kilometers now, stretching from Namibia's central plains to the outskirts of Botswana's reserves. Towns like Gobabis and Ganzi had been consumed overnight. Villages that had stood for generations were now smoking husks. The enemy did not leave survivors. And more chillingly, they did not take anything. They came to kill. And once done, they moved on. 3 sectors of the UEDC were hit hardest: North Ridge, South Flats, and Delta Line, which had once been a critical communications relay for ground units. Delta was gone now. Not overrun. Gone. The creatures hadn't just attacked, they had stripped it, as if devouring the very idea of resistance. Ground teams sent to investigate found only shattered stone, splintered equipment, and deep scars gouged into the earth itself, like something had clawed its way through the foundation of the world. Reports from survivors were grim. Some soldiers described creatures that mimicked human movement, almost learning tactics on the fly. Others swore they saw them coordinating, retreating under fire, setting traps, even baiting squads into ambushes. There was no central intelligence, no visible commanders, just a hive that seemed to know. It became clear these were not wild beasts. These were weapons. In the skies, the UEDC still held dominance. American bombers, European strike jets, and Chinese drones had established a kill zone around the core impact region. But air power was limited. The creatures didn't bunch together, they scattered, moving underground or through the wreckage of fallen towns. They used the terrain against their enemies. And every time a nest was cleared, 2 more appeared elsewhere. Like weeds. Like cancer. General Halleck convened an emergency war council inside the dome. Representatives from 15 nations attended in person, another 20 via satellite feed. Maps flickered with flashing red zones. No one raised voices anymore. There was no time for blame. The question wasn't who is responsible, it was how do we survive this? 3 options were proposed: retreat and nuke the zone, build a permanent defensive wall from Angola to Botswana, push forward and strike at the center. The saucer itself, the first, was impossible. Nuclear arsenals were still offline, disabled by the saucer's arrival. The second was suicidal, there weren't enough troops, not anymore. That left the third, but no one wanted to say it. Attack the saucer? The same object that had silenced the world's most powerful weapons without lifting a finger? The same object that had not even blinked since unleashing hell? It sounded like madness. But the madness had already arrived. Outside, the battle raged on. In North Ridge, Russian artillery batteries tried to hold the cliffs. But the creatures had learned. They attacked at night, using cover, scaling walls with grotesque precision. Sniper teams vanished. Drone feeds went dark one by one. In South Flats, refugee caravans moving east were ambushed by flying variants. They didn't just kill, they harvested. Corpses were dragged back toward nest zones. Some were never found. Others were discovered mutilated in impossible ways, opened not by claws, but with surgical precision. At Central Command, the perimeter had shrunk. Defense turrets overheated from constant firing. Ammunition supply lines had broken. Helicopters couldn't land. Medics operated in open air under gunfire. Entire platoons were rotated every 6 hours to prevent psychological collapse. Men and women who had never seen a battlefield were now veterans of humanity's last defense. Tomas Hale, still embedded with frontline units, captured every moment through his lens. He stopped labeling files by location. He labeled them by loss. The Road of Bones. Ashfield. Flight. The line that broke. His photos were streamed across the globe, raw, unfiltered. A Chinese soldier carrying a bleeding Nigerian child. An Iranian commander dying with an Israeli flag in his hands. A German nurse amputating a leg in the dirt while alien shrieks echoed in the distance. These images became the soul of the war. Not strategy, not numbers, but the faces of it. The ones fighting, the ones falling, the ones still hoping. Despite the horror, despite the rising death toll, something strange began to happen. Soldiers stopped caring about their uniforms. Orders came from whoever had the clearest voice. Medics stitched wounds regardless of flags. Ammunition was passed between units like water. And in those moments, something ancient was reborn, not nationalism, not religion, not fear. Solidarity. Not perfect, not universal, but real. On the evening of the 13th day, after a 17-hour battle at North Ridge, a miracle occurred. The line held. For the first time since the first drop, a sector was secured. Reinforcements arrived. Wounded were evacuated. Air support cleared the last wave. And the flag that went up wasn't any single nation's, it was the new UEDC emblem, a broken sword under a single eye. They hadn't won the war, but they had proven it was not unwinnable. And that meant something. Overhead, the saucer dimmed again, just briefly, like a breath drawn in. As if it had seen, as if it was recalibrating. War has a smell. It's not just blood or fire, it's oil-soaked sand, the stale breath of bunkers, the chemical sting of burnt plastic, and the acrid sweetness of death in heat. In the weeks since the invasion began, the front lines of humanity had absorbed that smell like a second skin. The deserts of Namibia and the plains of Botswana, once ancient and silent, now echoed with the sounds of gunfire, alien screeches, and the rumble of dying machines. But beneath the roar of combat, something quieter stirred, something more dangerous than alien claws or airborne beasts. Mistrust. Not all scars fade under banners and speeches. The soldiers might have been bleeding together, but their commanders still remembered old wars. And as the pressure mounted, the weight of history returned with claws of its own. The base at Swartkloof Ridge, codenamed Anchor Point, had become the central staging ground for UEDC operations. Positioned near the front, yet elevated and defensible, it housed senior officers from 20 nations, a multinational intelligence division, and the Forward Planning Division for strikes against newly forming hives. It was meant to be a symbol of unity. But symbols are fragile in war. The problem began with a missing drone. A high-altitude Chinese recon drone, outfitted with prototype bioscanners, vanished mid-flight near Sector 18, a stretch of hot zone temporarily held by joint French and Israeli units. The drone's last transmission showed thermal anomalies resembling a potential alien nest. But instead of alerting the UEDC's shared systems, France filed a sealed report directly to Paris. China demanded access. Israel claimed it had no knowledge. The UEDC chair denied any breach. And then the satellite footage was leaked. Not from enemy interference. From inside. The feed showed something unexplainable. A nest, yes, but clean. Not organic like the others. Geometric. Angular. As if built. Structures unlike the pods. Walls shaped in strange spirals, pulsing with faint blue light. Movement could be seen inside, but not creatures. Shapes. Tall. Bipedal. Watching. And most troubling of all, the footage ended mid-frame, not from jamming or static, but as if deliberately cut. Tensions erupted. China accused France of covering up a critical find. Russia accused the UEDC of fragmentation. America sent an emergency delegation to Anchor Point, led by General Melissa Kerrigan, whose blunt demeanor and harsh record from the Pacific conflicts made her respected and feared in equal measure. Iran and Israel clashed in strategy meetings. India threatened withdrawal unless transparency was restored. The UEDC was starting to crack under pressure not from the saucer above, but from the humans below it. General Halleck stood in the eye of the storm. His voice had kept the world united for 14 days. But now his orders were being questioned. His loyalty was being dissected. Whispers spread. If the object had learned to fight, perhaps it had also learned to divide. Meanwhile, on the front lines, the war continued. Thomas Hale traveled with a recovery unit sweeping the ruins of a destroyed refugee corridor outside Omitera. The land was choked in blackened husks, blood turned to tar beneath the sun. No survivors. But near the wreckage of a refugee truck, Hale found something disturbing, clawed symbols scorched into the sand. Repeating. Circular. Not random. Like writing. His photos sent alarms through the science divisions. These weren't just hunters. They were recording. Farther north, in Sector 7, a joint South Korean-Brazilian recon team encountered a new variant. Larger. Heavily armored. Capable of shrugging off direct rocket hits. It took 3 squads and a portable railgun to bring it down, and even then, it kept twitching for 6 minutes after death. Worse still, its chest cavity was hollow. A pod. A womb. Inside were smaller, larval forms, partially grown, twitching violently when exposed to sunlight. They weren't just invading. They were seeding. Humanity wasn't just fighting for land anymore. It was fighting for the right to exist tomorrow. Back at Anchor Point, the political situation worsened. Several nations withdrew advanced equipment teams. Air support rotation became uncoordinated. Requests for reinforcements were delayed due to bureaucratic friction. Even ammo shipments were misdirected. And the enemy noticed. In Sector 19, a coordinated alien assault breached the outer perimeter of an unprepared defense line. Over 600 soldiers died in 3 hours. The sector was lost. Some blamed bad luck, but others whispered that it had been allowed to fall to punish silence with silence. In the quiet that followed, General Halleck gathered his officers for an unannounced meeting. No staffers, no aides, no translators. Just men and women who remembered the worst of history now standing together in its echo. He spoke not as commander, but as a witness. Whatever this is, he said, it learns from us. It adapts. And now, I fear it's learning not from our weapons, but from our mistakes. There was silence. Then General Kerrigan stood. Without words, she extended her hand. Halleck took it. Others followed. A symbolic gesture, but one that rippled outward. The next morning, Anchor Point issued a new directive, Operation Requiem. A unified strike force would attempt to infiltrate one of the newly discovered geometric hives. Not to destroy, but to understand. It would be multinational. It would be filmed. It would be shared. Total transparency. The world held its breath again, not in fear, but in fragile hope. Because maybe, just maybe, if they could understand the enemy, they could survive it. The convoy departed at dawn, engines coughing smoke into cold desert air, shadows stretching long behind them as if the earth itself were reluctant to let them go. Operation Requiem had begun, not with fanfare, not with the roar of artillery, but with quiet resolve. The kind of silence that came not from fear, but from knowing too much about what waited ahead. The target was codenamed Hive Agar, a location in northern Namibia previously hit by an alien pod but later abandoned, or so the scouts believed. Satellite feeds showed signs of geometric structures emerging from the sand, faint energy signatures, and strange rhythmic pulses captured on seismic monitors. The hope was that this one hive, less active than the rest, could provide insight. A crack in the wall of the unknown. A chance to understand what humanity was actually fighting. The team was a microcosm of the planet itself: 60 soldiers, 12 scientists, 5 combat medics, 3 journalists, and 1 embedded AI technician. They came from 17 nations equipped with the best gear humanity could still scrape together: EMP rifles, plasma cutters, reactive armor, and custom drone scouts outfitted with hybrid sensor arrays. But all of it felt small in the face of what they might find. They traveled across shattered roads, past the skeletal remains of once thriving villages now overtaken by alien fungus, gray-blue tendrils curling up through brick and steel, pulsing faintly like veins under a skin that wasn't there yesterday. The land was sick. Corrupted, a wound that wasn't healing. On the 3rd day of the journey, they reached the perimeter. Hive Agar was wrong. It had formed not on the ground, but beneath it, sunken into a massive sinkhole that seemed to have peeled back the desert like the skin of an orange. The hole was nearly a kilometer wide, spiraling downward in concentric tiers of jagged alien stone. The structure was built, not grown, with perfect angles and ridges that defied human engineering. It resembled no known form of life, no animal nest, no insect hive. It was a cathedral to something unknowable. And it breathed. The temperature inside the hole fluctuated rhythmically. Air shifted in and out, slow and deep, like a living lung. Instruments confirmed it, wind patterns that followed no known thermodynamic logic. There was no heat source, no vent, just breath. Some theorized it was a geothermal vent. Others believed it was the hive itself, alive in ways no science could yet articulate. The descent began at dusk. Tomas Hale followed the first squad into the maw, camera slung over his shoulder, recording every step. Light panels mounted to helmets and shoulders illuminated the descent, but the deeper they went, the more those lights seemed to fade. Not malfunction, just drained, as if the very air didn't want them to see. The first sign of life came 50 meters down, bioresin walls similar to those seen in previous nests, but smoother, decorated with ridged patterns like script. The symbols repeated. Lines of dots, arcs intersecting with spirals. No one could read it, but everyone felt it. A language not meant for human eyes. Not for communication. For control. They passed husks, dead creatures, or perhaps abandoned molts. Carapaces the size of cattle, split open down the spine, hollow and dry. Others twitched faintly as if something inside had only just died. There were no sounds of movement, just the breath. And a low hum, not in the air, but in their skulls. Subsonic. A resonance that made teeth ache and memory stutter. Then they found the altar. It was impossible to call it anything else. A circular chamber lit from above by some unseen source. At the center, a massive, upright figure. Not alive, not moving, but unmistakably constructed. A bipedal shape over 3 meters tall, armored in overlapping plates of obsidian-like material, hands fused into long, tapered appendages. Its face was featureless. No eyes, no mouth. Just ridges where a head should be. It was standing in a pose that chilled every soul who looked upon it, arms open as if welcoming something. Or someone. Beside it, embedded into the floor, were the remains of human equipment, helmets, guns, a UDC patch torn from a jacket. No one had reported a missing team in this sector. No distress calls had come from this place. And yet, here were the artifacts of lives now erased. The scientists began scanning. The soldiers formed a perimeter. Tomas captured images in silence. And all of them knew whatever the structure was, it had been waiting. That was when the hive reacted. The lights died. The hum became a shriek. And the walls opened. Creatures poured from above, from the seams in the stone, from beneath their very feet. Smaller than those seen on the surface, faster, leaner, almost serpentine. They didn't attack like a wild pack. They struck like trained killers, coordinated and surgical. 2 soldiers were taken before anyone fired a shot. The corridor became chaos. Gunfire thundered against the stone, plasma rounds lighting the darkness in strobe-like flashes. Shouts filled the air, orders drowned in the echoing screeches of creatures that moved too fast to target. The scientists were pulled back. The journalists fell to the ground. Hale crawled beneath a fallen camera drone, recording blindly, the lens capturing a creature's mouth as it opened, no tongue, no teeth, just a vertical maw lined with twitching spines. The team fought its way back to the spiral descent, losing bodies every meter. Medics screamed for extraction. Drones were launched to find alternate exits. But the hive had already changed. The paths were different. The walls moved. The corridors bent where they had once been straight. This place was alive. At the final level before the surface, they found their way blocked by a shimmering wall, not solid, not liquid. A barrier of light and distortion. Behind it, a single tall figure stood. Not a creature, not a beast. One of them. The same shape as the altar statue. Motionless, faceless. But this one was breathing. And it was watching. General Halleck received the transmission just after midnight, partial video feed, garbled audio, 25 soldiers missing, 5 presumed dead. But the final frame was clear. The figure, standing in the dark, waiting. The image of the tall figure at the heart of Hive Agar spread through the UEDC like wildfire. It was leaked in fragments, low resolution, filled with artifacting and noise, but what it showed was unmistakable, something not animal, not insect, not beast. A being, upright, still, watching. For a species raised on stories of gods, monsters, and messiahs, the figure was all of them at once. Some called it the architect, others the first spawn. The American media branded it the obelisk. But among the soldiers, those who had stared into the holes beneath the earth, those who fought and bled in the sand, they gave it a simpler name, godless. Because there was nothing divine about what it represented. No warmth, no soul, no recognition in the gaze of that faceless watcher. Only precision, silence, power. The idea that something older and colder than any deity had set foot on this world and had judged us. And yet, godless did not move, did not strike, did not speak. It had stood inside the hive as the world burned above, doing nothing. And perhaps that made it more terrifying than any clawed beast or winged nightmare. The soldiers who survived the Agar breach were changed. Some wept without reason. Some didn't speak for days. One committed suicide in a debriefing chamber, not because of what they saw, but because of what they felt. Something in the air inside that hive. A pressure, an awareness. Not rage, not fear. Something else. Indifference. The war outside continued with unrelenting brutality. Across Africa's southern belt, humanity was holding, but barely. Each new hive that formed took more lives to destroy. Each assault from the saucer above brought new horrors. In the Mozambique corridor, a new variant emerged, quadrupedal, cloaked in a shimmering camouflage that made it nearly invisible. In Zambia, reports described a flying form capable of emitting pulses that caused mass nausea, even blindness. Each variant was tailored to an ecosystem, to a population, as if the enemy knew us. The saucer had not moved since the first drop, but the war had evolved. And then something unprecedented happened. At 2:19 local time, a UEDC satellite over Angola captured a burst of light from an uncharted hive. It wasn't an energy weapon. It wasn't a signal. It was a flare. Crude, bright, human in design. A rescue team was dispatched within the hour. What they found inside stunned the world. Survivors. A group of 23 civilians, including children, hiding deep inside the sublevels of Hive Caledon, one of the first pods ever dropped. They had survived by scavenging rations, avoiding creatures, and staying hidden in ventilation shafts. One of them, a Malawian mining engineer named Jemba Solu, had managed to rig a signal flare from a captured enemy light source. But that wasn't the miracle. The miracle was what else they found. Jemba had diagrams, hand-drawn sketches, pages of notes, weeks of observations. He had seen patterns in how the creatures moved, how they nested, where they wouldn't go. Places inside the hive the aliens avoided, chambers built differently, inscribed with spiraling symbols, never touched, never crossed. Safe zones. He believed these rooms weren't built by the same intelligence that spawned the monsters. They were older, quieter, as if something else had once lived or died inside these structures long before the invasion. And the creatures, for all their savagery, feared those places. The UDC mobilized a special task force, Echo Team, to investigate Jemba's notes. Multinational, elite, and sworn to secrecy. Their job, enter a hive, not to fight, but to map, to study, to find these zones and uncover their purpose. But others had different ideas. Several intelligence factions within the UDC began asking hard questions. Why were the creatures avoiding those rooms? Were they nests of some rival species? Control chambers? Escape routes? Or worse, prisons? A theory began to take shape. Quiet. Dangerous. What if the saucer wasn't a transport? What if it was a key? And the hives were locks? Speculation spread like rot. Scientists argued. Generals clashed. Some wanted to accelerate strikes against the saucer. Others warned that doing so could unleash something far worse. There were even whispers that Godless, the tall figure, wasn't the invader. It was the jailer. That it had been buried here long ago, sealed away in geometric tombs, and the saucer had come not to conquer, but to free it. Suddenly, the question wasn't what are we fighting? It was what else have we awoken? General Halleck knew he had to act. Public confidence was cracking. Morale was slipping. Images of Godless were being used by cults, extremists, even political factions claiming the war was divine punishment. Riots broke out in cities far from the front. Earth wasn't just losing the battle in the sand. It was losing the war inside its own mind. And then the saucer moved. For the first time since the invasion began, it shifted slowly, imperceptibly, like a mountain turning to watch. It rotated its underbelly toward the Congo Basin, where seismic readings showed something stirring beneath the rainforest floor. A signal burst followed, short, low frequency, unlike anything seen before. And across all remaining hives, the creatures stopped moving. For 6 minutes and 27 seconds, they froze. Not dead, not inert. Paused. Every battlefield, every zone, every nest, as if listening, as if awaiting a response. And then, just like that, they moved again. But differently. Smarter. Faster. Unified. The war had entered a new phase. And the world braced for what came next. The Congo Basin, Earth's second lung, once pulsed with life. 1 million species lived and died beneath its emerald canopy, jaguars slinking through roots, elephants treading ancestral paths, insects chittering in a language older than fire. It was a place so dense with memory, so deeply woven into the planet's skin, that even the wars of man often bypassed it. But now something older than memory was waking beneath the trees. The saucer moved again on the 15th day. Not by distance, it still hovered above the Namibian kill zone, but its underbelly rotated, aligning itself with pinpoint precision toward a remote corner of the Congo. Satellites traced the vector. AI analysts mapped the trajectory. It led to a swamp-choked depression known to few as Zone EOS 9, a forgotten scar on the Earth, once marked by meteor impact centuries ago, long dismissed as unremarkable. Now it was alive. Seismic sensors recorded tremors deep, low, and rhythmically pulsing. The ground wasn't cracking. It was breathing. The same pattern found beneath hive agar. The same resonant hum. Except here, it was stronger. Older. The UDC scrambled a response, sending Echo Team, the same unit forged after the hive agar incursion, accompanied by South African Rangers, Congolese environmental scouts, and 3 of the world's top xenobiologists. The mission, enter Zone EOS 9, identify what the saucer was reacting to, and if possible, stop it. They flew in low, under radar, in modified stealth helijets outfitted with static dampening mesh. The trees swallowed them whole. What was once forest became cathedral, towering trunks cloaked in moss, light filtering through in gold shards. But the air was wrong. Too still. No birds. No frogs. Not even insects. As if the jungle had inhaled and forgotten to exhale. The team moved through mud and vine, guided by GPS coordinates and instinct. All paths led to the same place, a stone basin choked in roots and moss, surrounded by black water that shimmered despite the stillness. At the center stood a spire. Not man-made. Not natural. Alien. 6 meters tall. Spiral in shape. Covered in the same symbols seen in agar, carved deep and glowing faintly even in daylight. The spire pulsed with light every few seconds, matching the rhythm of the tremors beneath. A beacon. A signal. And the forest hated it. Trees nearest the spire had blackened, curled inward as if recoiling. No animals came near. One scout described it as a place the earth forgot how to breathe. Then, as the team set up a scanning perimeter, the saucer responded. A column of light burst from its underside, silent, smooth, and impossibly narrow. It didn't descend like lightning. It reached a thread of energy connecting saucer to spire. For 2 minutes, the light held, forming a perfect line from sky to jungle. And then the basin opened. The earth didn't crack, it peeled. Slowly, geometrically, like flower petals unfolding. Beneath the roots and mud was something vast and silver, covered in the same alien geometry buried beneath kilometers of earth. A construct. A ship. A vault. None could say. But what emerged from its mouth was movement. Not like the swarms from the desert. This was something else. Fewer in number. Taller. Stranger. Creatures stepped forward, bipedal, elongated, armored in plates of black-green sheen, heads crowned with jagged horns. They did not screech. They did not crawl. They walked. And behind them floated monoliths, hexagonal slabs, humming with internal glow, rotating slowly as if scanning the air. These were not scouts. They were envoys. But of what? Before Echo Team could react, the first soldier collapsed, blood streaming from the nose, convulsing. Then another. Not attacked. Overwhelmed. The sound returned, not audible, but felt. A pressure in the skull. A vibration in the marrow. The same hum from the hive, but sharper, more focused. Some called it a scream you couldn't hear. Others said it was a thought too large to survive. The team fell back, dragging wounded, leaving equipment behind. Drones attempted to capture the scene, but most failed. Those that transmitted sent images that burned themselves into analysts' minds, creatures walking in perfect symmetry, one raising its elongated hand toward the sky and the saucer answering with a new pulse of light. Not communication. Activation. What lay beneath the Congo was not a hive. It was a gateway. Tomas Hale, now working within the UEDC's embedded comms unit, watched the feed in silence. He saw the monoliths rotate. He saw the spire crack open, revealing inner mechanisms spinning with impossible precision. He saw the jungle around it die, leaves falling in waves, trees bending away, animals convulsing in the distance. He whispered what no one wanted to admit. It's not just a war. It's a ritual. The saucer's light faded. The monoliths retreated. The creatures turned and walked back into the vault. The forest sealed itself again, mud folding, vines curling as if nothing had ever opened. But the signal continued. The pulse. The heartbeat. The jungle was now part of it. The world's leaders met in emergency session, virtual and physical, across bunkers and war rooms. Theories exploded. Some believed the vault was a communication node to another world. Others believed it was a prison, now being unlocked. A few argued it was Earth itself, the whole planet, a weapon being reclaimed. One thing was clear. The saucer was not here for conquest. It was here to awaken something. And Zonios 9 was only the beginning. Smoke no longer meant fire. In the 20th day of Earth's war, smoke was the perfume of extinction, rising in long, black ribbons from the husks of cities, outposts, and forests where battles had been lost or worse, forgotten. What hadn't been taken by the creatures was scorched by the retreat. And what couldn't be retreated from was left to rot in silence. The Kalahari front was breaking. The rainforest trembled. And the sky remained silent but watching. After the Congo event, nothing made sense anymore. The UEDC command, what remained of it, had tried to impose order. Maps were redrawn, sectors renamed. But the creatures had evolved again. Faster. Stronger. The swarms became disciplined, working in sync across hundreds of kilometers. Strike teams disappeared in minutes. Hives were now being built not just into the earth, but with the earth. Creatures began shaping terrain, rooting into the ground, reinforcing with bone-like structures, excreting resin that turned soft clay into jagged citadels. And then came the fires. It started with reports from eastern Namibia, fields of savanna that erupted not from enemy weapons, but from the ground itself. Flames blue and unnatural, burning from within. Soldiers sent to investigate were found blackened, melted, or simply gone. One drone sent to the edge of the site returned images of charred earth arranged in perfect, circular glyphs, a message some thought. A warning, others said. But Tomas Hale saw something different. He saw a ritual site. General Halleck had called an emergency summit inside the dome. No longer a full council, just remnants. Half the chairs were empty. Representatives from India, Brazil, and Turkey had not checked in. Rumors swirled of internal collapse, martial law, religious revolts, mass desertions. Only the most intact coalitions remained: China, America, France, Iran, South Africa. And even they were strained to cracking. And still, the saucer hovered. It had not moved again since the Congo pulse. But the sky beneath it had begun to shimmer, barely visible only through ultraband infrared scans. A dome of distortion forming below it. A shield, maybe? Or a field? Or something far more alien? Then came the message. It arrived not by transmission, but by impression, a wave of thought that swept through the front line and beyond. It hit everyone differently. Some heard voices. Others saw symbols. A few collapsed into seizures, screaming names they didn't know. But for the majority, it was simple. A vision. A world without cities. Without borders. A planet overgrown in black vines and glowing towers. Skies darkened by a second moon. And everywhere them. Watching. Building. Waiting. No sound. No pain. Just emptiness. It was not a threat. It was a promise. Scientists called it a mass telepathic event. Theologians called it prophecy. Some simply called it the end. But the result was the same: panic. 3 UEDC bases experienced riots. Several divisions stopped responding. In Chad, a rogue battalion turned its weapons on its own allies, shouting that the world had already been taken, that resistance was a lie. It took 3 hours and 52 lives to retake the base. Faith fractured. Some saw the figure godless as a savior come to reset a corrupt world. Others blamed the saucer for everything and called for a suicidal assault. Still more vanished into the wild, abandoning the war entirely. And yet, amid the ash, hope sparked. At an abandoned UEDC observation post near the burned fields of Sector 31, a squad of Ethiopian engineers and Ghanaian medics discovered something extraordinary. Beneath the charred symbols in the earth beneath the ash, they found roots. Not natural roots. Alien. Biomechanical in appearance, yet not synthetic. Tubes of black pulsing matter coiled beneath the dirt like arteries, leading outward from the site like veins from a heart. And buried in the center, a smooth crystal the size of a human skull, still warm, still glowing. They brought it back. Under isolation, scientists studied it. It pulsed in patterns, emitted soft radiation, and when exposed to certain audio frequencies, it responded. Not with sound, with light. Flashing symbols. Lines forming like written sentences. It was language. For the first time, Earth had something they could speak to. The crystal, dubbed the cognosphere, became the focal point of global efforts. Linguists, AI systems, mathematicians all joined forces to decode it. And though no direct translation was achieved, a pattern emerged. Images, snapshots, data, a history, a warning. The saucer, it seemed, was not the first. It was the latest. A vanguard in a pattern that stretched across worlds. Dozens, maybe hundreds of civilizations consumed or rewritten. The creatures were not conquerors in the traditional sense. They were harbingers. Biological terraforming systems designed not merely to kill, but to convert. Each planet seeded. Each population remade. But something strange was in the records. A pause. A gap between the last 2 conquests. Thousands of years. Time unaccounted for. As if the chain had been broken. Or interrupted. And the name repeating in every sequence always attached to the pause. Ellerin. No one knew what it meant. A place? A people? A resistance? But it was the first sign that maybe, just maybe, someone else had fought back. And lived. As the chapter closed on the blood and fire of Earth's first month under the shadow of the saucer, a new question dawned. Was this humanity's end? Or its beginning? Beneath the dust of shattered plains, under the bones of broken cities and the roots of the last living forests, Earth hummed. Not the hum of tectonics or life or technology, but something deeper. Something that was not ours. A pulse below perception. A message too vast for the mind and too old for the soil. After the cognosphere was discovered, the world changed. It wasn't sudden. Not like the initial descent of the saucer or the swarms that followed. It was slower, like water rising in a locked room. Every scientific institution, every UEDC black lab, every half-functioning AI server across the continents began decoding fragments of its transmission. Patterns, geometry, light, frequencies not meant to be heard by ears, but by the brain itself, sequences that bypassed language and burrowed directly into instinct. The cognosphere wasn't just communicating, it was reaching. And deep below, something was answering back. The signs came quietly at first. Seismic murmurs in places far from known hives. The ice shelves of Antarctica throbbed with vibrations never recorded before. In Japan, deep ocean sonar picked up rhythmic beats echoing along the Mariana Trench. And in the Sahara, where no pods had fallen, a UEDC dig team stumbled upon a buried stone covered in the same spirals seen in Namibia and Congo. The conclusion came slowly, then all at once. The saucer wasn't seeding Earth. It was reawakening it. The planet itself was not passive in this invasion. It was part of it, prepared for it, changed long ago, hidden beneath layers of time and tectonic drift. Humanity had built cities on top of scars it never saw. We thought we ruled the surface, but something else had always owned the core. The truth shattered morale across half the command. In bunkers beneath Lusaka, analysts sobbed. In outposts in Lesotho, men laid down their arms and walked into the night. A Russian officer shot himself in front of a data screen. But not all broke. Some saw in the cognosphere not defeat, but a thread, a direction, a path. Not a weapon, but a tool. Among them, Dr. Solène Marchand, a linguist from Marseille turned code analyst, and Colonel Fake El Khatib, a former engineer turned tactician who both believed the cognosphere was not warning us out of pity, but testing us, offering breadcrumbs to those willing to listen. Together, they proposed a bold theory: if the signal was being answered beneath the Earth, then perhaps a counter-signal could be sent. Not to the saucer, to whatever still lived beneath us. Operation Deep Whisper was born. With dwindling resources, the UEDC repurposed a derelict South African diamond mine near Kimberley, one of the deepest man-made holes on Earth. Engineers reactivated ancient drills, descended into dust-choked shafts, and began building a resonance chamber using scavenged alien materials and fragments of the cognosphere itself. Their goal: simulate the pulse, amplify it, and see who or what might respond. The days that followed blurred into exhaustion. Men died in cave-ins. 2 workers vanished after breaching a new sublevel. Their radios screamed with static and bone-shattering noise before going dark. But the chamber was completed. Makeshift, crude, unstable, but real. They activated it on the 3rd night, and the world screamed. It wasn't the chamber. It wasn't the saucer. It was Earth. Every seismograph, every radio wave, every machine that could measure the voice of the planet went haywire. Magnetic poles stuttered. Tides misbehaved. Animals fled inland. Flocks flew into mountains. And across every screen tied into the cognosphere, a single word repeated: awake. Then silence. But it wasn't over. From the mine's lowest level, a voice rose. Not in sound, but in mind. The engineers collapsed. The scientists bled from their ears. Colonel El Khatib clawed at his face. Only Solène stood unmoving, her eyes locked on the cognosphere's glow. Later, when asked what she heard, she only said, a question. Not in words. In weight. In intent. It asked, "Are you the ones who stayed?" The implications were staggering. Someone else had been here. Long ago. And not just visited Earth, but fought on it. And lost. But perhaps not all of them had died. The saucer had not responded. Not yet. But on the 17th hour after the chamber's activation, the skies shifted. The shimmering field beneath the saucer thickened. Lightning spiraled without thunder. And in the ruins of Windhoek, a previously dormant pod exploded into light, not attack, not growth, but birth. From its core rose a figure. Not insectoid. Not bestial. Humanoid. Clad in iridescent black, body elongated, arms stretched with clawed fingers too long for comfort, and a face covered in a ridged helm of bone and chrome. It didn't attack. It walked. It headed north. Toward the signal. Toward the mine. The first of them had come. Whether it was a soldier, a messenger, or an executioner, no one knew. But they called it the Witness. The figure that emerged from the ruins did not rush, did not run, did not screech like the others. It walked calmly, like a ghost that had never left the graveyard. The ruins of Windhoek trembled in its presence, not from noise or motion, but from something else, an invisible gravity, as though the very memory of the city recoiled from what had stepped out of the glowing pod. The air around it shimmered faintly, distorting edges as if it were not quite part of this world. Drones sent to intercept were blinded. Static surged in their optics and targeting systems jammed. Surveillance footage captured only fragments, elongated limbs, limbs too precise in their symmetry, and a head like a crown of bone encased in shifting armor. No face, no eyes, but it saw. All who glimpsed it, whether through grainy satellite link or trembling binoculars, felt the same thing. They were being measured. The UEDC didn't issue orders at first. There was hesitation, fear, not just of the figure, but of what reacting to it might provoke. So it was allowed to walk. It crossed the Namib Plains in a straight line, unbothered by terrain, immune to temperature, and untouched by swarming creatures. Where other monsters lurked in shadow or burst from the ground in blind savagery, the smaller ones gave way to the Witness. They paused, stilled, and bowed in some ancient instinct before slithering aside. Like ants fleeing from the scent of the queen. In the mines at Kimberley, the resonance chamber lay silent but buzzing. The cognosphere remained active, glowing impulses now synced to the Earth's magnetic field, subtly shifting with each tremor. The team stationed there knew something had changed even before radar detected the approaching figure. Dreams had turned strange. People woke sweating with the taste of copper on their tongues. A soldier claimed he heard his dead father whispering in the darkness of the mine's lower levels. A technician stared at a wall for 6 hours and refused to speak again. Whatever had been sleeping beneath them, the activation had not just awoken it, it had invited something. And the witness had accepted. As it moved across the land, weather changed. Not violently, but subtly. Clouds formed in patterns too perfect for nature. Birds flew in circles before collapsing mid-flight. Soil where its feet touched darkened, hardened, almost calcified. The air grew heavy. Radios failed. Compasses reversed. Dogs howled without cause. In Johannesburg, 3 civilian psychics, part of a fringe emergency team organized for cognitive anomalies, simultaneously entered seizures. When they woke, they each uttered the same word. Not in English. Not in Zulu or French or Persian. In a language no one recognized. But the cognosphere recognized it. Translated loosely, it meant the first witness to the final recall. The UEDC finally acted. They launched no missiles, nothing so loud. Instead, they dispatched observers, unarmed, from multiple nations. Small hover units shadowed the figure at a distance, maintaining visual contact. All attempts to scan it failed. LiDAR bent around its shape. Heat sensors read it as colder than its surroundings. When someone tried to send an AI-controlled rover closer than 100 meters, the feed turned to black and never returned. But the witness made no move to stop them. It simply walked, as if it had waited an eternity to follow this path. As if the cognosphere, the signal from the deep, the chamber in the mine, all of it was merely the final domino in a sequence set eons ago. Inside the command center, General Halleck watched the latest drone footage in silence. No speeches now. No rallying cries. Only stillness and a slow dread sinking into every corner of the war room. He ordered full clearance of the Kimberley site, evacuation of non-critical personnel, and the erection of internal barriers, not to stop the witness, but to contain whatever it would awaken. His voice was low, controlled, but his eyes betrayed him. He, like the rest, felt it now. They had touched something they should not have touched. Not alien, not divine, but other. The kind of other that rewrote the story of a planet. The kind that did not invade by ships or weapons, but by memory. As if Earth itself remembered something its children had forgotten and the witness was its vessel. The figure reached the outer edge of Kimberley by nightfall. No troops approached. No weapons were raised. It walked directly to the site's lowest access tunnel and paused. Just once. Its head turned slightly toward the sky as if listening. Then it descended, slow and deliberate, down into the earth. Into the mine. Into the chamber. Sensors failed instantly. Lights dimmed. The cognosphere pulsed once, hard enough to crack one of the reinforced plex domes. Then it went dark. And for 1 full hour, no sound came from the deep. When it returned, the cognosphere's light had changed. No longer blue. Now white. Cold. Still. And when technicians dared to approach it again, they found something etched into the concrete floor around it, spirals burned with such precision they seemed carved by machine. A new message. It read, "You are not the first. You are not the last. But you are the last who can choose." The witness was gone. Not destroyed. Not captured. Simply no longer there. And somewhere above, the saucer began to glow again. The days following the witness's disappearance were not filled with action, but with unease. A silence blanketed the war front, deeper than the lull between battles. The hives, once noisy with movement, seemed to hold their breath. The swarms pulled back from the outer sectors, not in retreat, but as if summoned elsewhere, toward a greater purpose unknown to human eyes. Satellite feeds showed no new drops, no new creatures. The sky remained the same, pierced by that immovable saucer still humming over southern Africa like the eye of a storm that refused to break. But in that silence, something grew. And what grew was not hope. It was heat. It began in Mozambique, in the ghost forests beyond Lake Chilwa, where soldiers reported soil too hot to touch, despite no visible flame. At first, they believed it to be geothermal, anomalies caused by resonance pulses from the deep mines. But then vegetation began to blacken, not from burning, but from wilting, as if the heat carried purpose. A forward recon team wearing thermal suits ventured in. The footage they returned showed trees sagging inward, bark blistered as if boiled from within, and insects dead in perfect rings around what looked like cracked, glowing fault lines. And then came the quake, not tectonic, not natural. A pulse. A single, deafening throb of pressure that flattened everything for 2 kilometers in every direction. By the time the UEDC responded, it was already too late. The earth opened. It didn't explode or collapse. Peeled, like skin. Perfect geometric fissures formed in the forest floor, revealing chambers of molten architecture beneath. Walls of burning spiral metal. Structures that pulsed with white gold light. From within came a lightless fire. Not darkness, not flame, but a heat so pure it left no ash, only shadow. What emerged from this rupture was not a swarm. It was not even a creature in the conventional sense. It was shape, a form of walking fire, limbs fluid and shifting, encased in cracked obsidian shells like a chrysalis stretched over a sun. They didn't run. They didn't scream. They walked upright in formation, and wherever they passed, the world died behind them. Not in flames, but in stillness. Trees froze in place, air shimmered, and metal bent without sound. The soldiers called them Ashborn. The Ashborn didn't attack outposts directly. They walked past human lines as if they weren't there. Bullets disintegrated inches from their form. Rocket fire only made them pause. Some soldiers fell to their knees just watching them. Eyes glazed, skin blistered from exposure. It was as if fire had taken shape, and in that shape found memory. A memory of something ancient, vengeful, cleansing. Command feared a new evolution. But Thomas Hale, deep within the cognitive division studying the cognosphere's patterns, saw something else. The Ashborn were not new. They were old, more ancient than the saucer itself, older than the witness. They were the planet's immune system, awakened not to serve the saucer, but to respond to what had been stirred. They were not soldiers. They were executioners, and they had awoken below us. One emerged from the mines beneath Lake Tanganyika, sinking the entire western corridor of the lake in a single night. Another rose from a desert crater near the Angolan border, trailing ribbons of black glass where it walked. The third came not from Earth, but from inside a dormant hive itself, tearing it open from within like a molting snake. Each one moved slowly, inexorably, toward one destination, the chamber at Kimberley. UEDC High Command debated evacuation, but others argued differently. Solène Marchand insisted the Ashborn weren't drawn to destroy, it was something else. Convergence, as if all the roads now led to that mine, and to what had occurred there when the witness walked beneath. Colonel El-Khatib, still recovering from his exposure, believed the cognosphere had called out in more than language, that it had emitted a beacon, and now the old children of Earth, those hidden beneath crust and bone, had begun to gather. The fear was not just in what might come from this convergence. It was in what might wake up in response. And far above, the saucer began to move again. Not by miles, not by rotation, but by shape. For the first time, its lower hemisphere opened, not violently, not with sound, but with grace. A spiral aperture unwound like a mechanical iris, revealing a yawning hollow within. It wasn't a weapon, not yet. It was an eye, and from it came not light but a new sound, a single tone so low it could only be felt in the bones. The same tone now echoed in Kimberley's walls. The chamber beneath the mine began to vibrate. Cracks formed around the cognosphere's pedestal. Lights failed, and in the deepest layer of the earth, beyond tunnels, beyond architecture, something began to glow. It was not alien. It was not machine. It was a heart, not flesh, not living, but beating all the same. The pulse matched the saucer, matched the cognosphere, matched the fire. The truth became unbearable. Earth was not just being invaded, it was being restarted. The mine at Kimberley, once a scar carved by greed, had become the axis of a dying world. What began as a pit of stone and soil had deepened into something far older than any map, any nation, any species. It was no longer a mine. It was a throat, and the earth was preparing to speak. The cognosphere, now cold to the touch and pulsing in white rhythm, was silent to all devices, but the air around it was no longer still. Static danced along concrete, hair lifted with each pulse. Unseen energy saturated every chamber. Instruments placed to monitor electromagnetic fields began spinning into nonsense. And in the deepest shaft, below the last human boot print, a glow began to pulse behind the bedrock, a light without source, steady and patient, like a warning that had waited 1 billion years for someone to trigger it. And trigger it they had. Above, the Ashbourne closed in. 3 of them now. Each a cathedral of walking fire, obsidian-wrapped and haloed in heat that did not rise but curved, bending light and sound. They came from 3 different directions, but each turned toward the mine with eerie precision, as if hearing a call embedded in the crust itself. No command had been issued. No voice was spoken. Yet they converged day by day, leaving behind them lines of blackened ruin, yet not chaotic. Not random. Symbolic. From satellite view, their burn paths formed a pattern too precise to be dismissed. A perfect triangle, a sigil, ancient and geometrically flawless, with Kimberly at its center. At UDC command, fear gave way to paralysis. No strategy accounted for this. No war game had predicted ritual geometry on a continental scale. Intelligence reports spoke of subterranean activity increasing across Africa. Deep penetration scanners identified caverns once thought empty now breathing, reshaping. Old mines, forgotten fault lines, even aquifers began to resonate with a frequency that could not be localized. It was not random. It was not alien. It was orchestrated. And the heart beneath Kimberly continued to beat. Thomas Hale, who now slept in 20-minute increments and lived entirely in the glow of sensor walls, watched the pulse with growing clarity. The cognosphere no longer produced language. It produced resonance. It was speaking not to them, but through them. Through the mine. Through the bones of the earth. And through something deeper, something beneath Earth's memory. Then came the fracture. At 3:27, the mine shook, not from collapse, not from combat, but from something within. Sensors blew. Rock cracked in perfect, symmetrical spirals. A pit opened where no tunnel existed, smooth, precise, cylindrical. Not dug. Formed. And at its bottom, movement. Not hostile. Not even active. But pulsing. Waiting. Colonel El-Khatib ordered an emergency descent team, 5 elite engineers and 2 linguists, into the new shaft. Only one returned. Her hair white, her voice nearly gone. What she managed to say was recorded and played in every UEDC briefing afterward. It's not a weapon, it's not a heart, it's memory. She had seen it, or what her mind could interpret of it. A vast sphere, not metal, not stone, covered in the same spiral script found in the Congo and Namibia, but deeper. Each symbol moved, shifted, as if alive, as if reacting to her thoughts. And within the center of that sphere, something glowed, shaped like a flame frozen in crystal. The core. It did not radiate heat or light. It radiated presence. It had no voice, no face, no limbs. But it knew. Not a machine. Not a creature. Not even a consciousness in the human sense. A remnant. A planetary black box. Encoded not with data, but with intention. It was not born of Earth, but it had become Earth. Bled into its gravity. Melted into its plates. Folded itself into the marrow of every tectonic plate, every volcanic chamber. A deep intelligence too vast to grasp. Waiting. Reactivated only when certain parameters had been met. And now, those parameters had been fulfilled. The arrival of the saucer. The activation of the cognosphere. The pulse sent from the resonance chamber. And the step of the witness. It was all sequence. All ritual. And now the Earth's heart had been reawakened. Above, the saucer shifted again. Its iris widened, revealing inner structures spinning like a galactic observatory. From within came no weapon. No beam, only darkness, and from it a sound that was not sound. It made radios howl and metal shiver. It shattered glass 5 miles from the mine. People screamed in their sleep across 3 countries. A single word appeared on every cognosphere-linked device. Open. And across the world, seismic sensors screamed. Not in Africa. Everywhere. Old impact sites. Suboceanic rifts. Fault lines long thought dead. All of them began to pulse in time. The Earth wasn't just being reshaped. It was responding. Whatever had been buried beneath Kimberly was not alone. It was part of a network, one we had never seen, one we were never meant to awaken. And the Ashbourne? They were just the ushers. There was a stillness before the first scream, not from mouths or machines, but from the Earth itself. A silence that stretched so wide it pressed on the lungs, as if the atmosphere was trying to remember how to breathe. And then, from the core of the planet to the rim of the stratosphere, something ancient woke. The Great Recall was not a single event. It was a cascade triggered the moment the Ashborn reached the perimeter of the Kimberley mine. No weapons were fired. No ritual was enacted. They simply arrived, stood in a perfect triangular formation, and stopped. They faced inward toward the spiral chamber, their burning forms suddenly rigid, as if listening to a frequency too deep for the surface to hear. For 2 full minutes, nothing happened. Then the planet shuddered, not from tectonic drift or artificial detonation, but from coordinated movement beneath every continental plate. Seismographs spun wild across every station left online. Ocean buoys bobbed violently from pressure waves rising through the crust. In California, sinkholes opened in perfect geometric patterns. In Siberia, a field of long-dead craters lit with pulsing blue light. And in South Africa, deep beneath the cognosphere, the glowing sphere cracked open. Not broken, but peeled like the skin of a seed too long buried. From within poured not light, but memory. Images, not in the visual sense, but embedded in cognition. Wars fought with tools of thought, cities grown from living stone, stars falling as sacrifices, and an enemy that had no face, only function. What had slept beneath the earth was not a machine, not a god. It was a record, a living, resonant repository of everything that had come before. A library buried not in books or servers, but in the crust itself. And it had just been unlocked. The cognosphere began to broadcast again, but not in words. In pressure. In symbols imprinted into the dreams of every human within 100 kilometers. A massive global pulse surged through communication networks, blacking out satellites and crashing hardened servers. And in the seconds after the pulse, people began to speak languages they had never learned. Some sketched spiral glyphs in the dirt. Others wandered into the wild, possessed by visions of lands that never existed. Then came the storms. The sky turned not gray, but silver. Clouds formed in hexagonal spirals, rain falling upward in thin, whispering lines before disintegrating into ash. The saucer, still hovering like a crown above it all, finally moved, its central iris expanding, revealing within not another craft or weapon, but a hollow sphere rotating in impossible angles. A singularity of space folding in place, distorting light as if the sky had cracked open. From that aperture, a beam of something between light and matter descended not into the mine, but into the center of the Ashborn triangle. And from there, everything sank. The ground between the Ashborn did not collapse. It reversed. Rock turned soft. Time lost direction. Plants aged, crumbled, and regrew in seconds. Light bent inward, forming a spiraling vortex of perfect black and white, a tunnel downward not into rock, but into structure. A corridor. An invitation. The Earth had remembered. Inside UDC Command, panic warred with awe. Generals barked orders. Scientists wept in the glow of real-time data. Solène Marchand stood silent, eyes locked on the resonance waveform rising from the cognosphere, tears running down her face. When asked what she saw, she simply said, "It's not a signal. It's a summons." Every ancient site on Earth, every meteor crater, mythic ruin, unexplained formation began to pulse in synchrony. From Uluru to Stonehenge to Göbekli Tepe, the spiral began to manifest. In Antarctica, a long-buried structure revealed itself through shifting ice, a mirror of the sphere beneath Kimberley. In the Mariana Trench, a sonar contact rose slowly, impossibly large, humming with the same frequency. All of it pointing not just to Earth as a target, but as an archive. And humanity? We were the last custodians. The saucer had not come to conquer. It had come to retrieve. Not just technology, not just knowledge, but everything. The spiral beneath the Ashborn finished forming. A perfect downward tunnel now glowed in impossible color. It was not fire, not stone. It was something else, something shaped by intent, by purpose older than human civilization. The 3 Ashborn turned in unison and began their descent. No words, no resistance. They simply walked into the spiraling core, and as they did, the ground sealed behind them, not with violence, but like a final page turning shut. And then, silence. Again. But this time, it was not fear. It was anticipation. The Earth had sent its first answer. And the saucer waited. Its iris dimmed. Its pulse slowed. And in the stillness that followed, every cognosphere across every lab blinked once. Then printed the same image. A spiral. And a date. 1 week from now. The final chapter was coming, and the world was being asked to choose to remain as forgotten children of a planet that no longer belonged to them, or to ascend as witnesses to something greater. The days that followed were the quietest since the invasion began. No swarms descended. No pods fell from the sky. The skies remained silver, still humming with faint spirals of unnatural cloud. Yet in that silence, no one felt peace. It was not the calm of safety, but the pause before judgment. The Ashbourne had vanished, swallowed into the spiraling wound in the earth beneath Kimberley, and the saucer no longer pulsed with menace. Instead, it hovered with expectation, its vast iris dimmed to a soft white glow. For the first time, humanity felt not like prey, but like an audience. Beneath the mine, the cognosphere no longer responded to any probes or scans. It had entered a dormant state, yet its energy signatures had deepened, subtler, denser, woven not through electronics, but through space itself. Instruments reported gravitational anomalies around the spiral chamber, suggesting curvature in the local field, like the mine was no longer resting entirely in this world. And still, from the cracked vault below, the heartbeat continued. A slow, deep, perfect rhythm, as if Earth had a second core now, and it had just opened its eye. Colonel El-Khatib stood in the forward command post at the mine's edge, watching the descending spiral from afar. His skin was grayer than before, hair dusted with white, as if the war had aged him by decades. Around him, soldiers moved slowly, methodically, more like attendants in a temple than fighters on a battlefield. They no longer expected to fight. Not now. Not against this. What resistance could possibly matter when the enemy had never drawn a blade, never fired a weapon, but instead unraveled the very meaning of what the planet was? Across the globe, the signs continued. The spiral glyphs appeared now even where no enemy contact had been recorded. In the sands of Cairo, in the stone cliffs of the Andes, in Arctic ice cores untouched for millennia. They appeared on glass, on water, on the skin of those who dreamed. Some woke screaming with spiral scars burned into their arms. Others walked into oceans and never returned. Entire populations of birds migrated in perfect fractal shapes. The sun itself began to take on a faint halo when viewed through polarized lenses, 7 subtle rings that echoed the spiral over and over as if the universe was reflecting the signal back at itself. And then, 6 days after the spiral chamber opened, the cognosphere activated again. Not with symbols, not with sound, but with a path. A luminous projection rose from the crystal core, three-dimensional, alive, rotating with gravity-defying motion. It depicted the Earth as seen from above. But not the Earth we knew. It was overgrown, reshaped, reformed into a biosphere of impossible harmony. Cities made of living light. Oceans that pulsed with bioluminescent veins. Mountains carved into holy circuits. A world not conquered, but corrected. And then the image split, duplicated, and beside the utopia, another version emerged. Familiar. Scarred. Gray. Struggling. Fires burned in its cities. Skies were choked. Waters blackened. The same Earth, but untouched. Unascended, and above them both a single phrase. Choice, final recall. The UEDC didn't know how to respond. There were no diplomats for this. No treaties to sign. No enemy to argue with. What they faced was not war. It was invitation. An evolutionary branch offered like a test. And behind the test, something far greater. Perhaps salvation. Perhaps extinction. The saucer had not destroyed Earth because destruction had never been its purpose. It had come not to punish, but to harvest. Not resources, not minerals, but potential. The seed that lay dormant since the last recall, buried deep beneath the planet's crust, had now been triggered. And the question was no longer about survival. It was about worthiness. Across UEDC command, across what remained of the global leadership structure, the debate fractured. Some argued for immediate surrender, acceptance, transcendence. Others feared assimilation, loss of identity. A third voice rose, one that spoke of containment, of buying time to understand before committing to something irreversible. But none could ignore the signs. The countdown had begun. The spiral projection updated every hour, shrinking in shape, counting down towards some converging point. And on the final morning before the threshold, something changed again. A second witness appeared, not walking this time, falling. From the saucer, slowly, like a feather in reverse gravity, it descended into the spiral core. Where the Ashbourne had gone, it followed, arms outstretched, glowing with internal light, not burning but shimmering, as if made of memory and crystal and breath. It bore no weapon, no armor. And as it entered the spiral, the cognosphere pulsed once more, and displayed a final message, enter, or END. The threshold had been drawn. Beneath the Earth, in the deepest hollow, a gate awaited. And the future of humanity, its soul, its story, lay not in battle, not in conquest, but in the answer it would give. The gate was not made of stone or metal. It did not rise like a fortress or hum like the cognosphere. It was simply there. A spiral carved into the Earth itself. glowing faintly in rhythm with the pulse of the saucer high above. It was geometry given form, an aperture into something so perfectly aligned with the planet's magnetic breath that it felt as though Earth had grown it like a second umbilical cord. At its edges, the soil held still, unshifting despite the vast forces below. Time seemed thinner there, slower. Every sound was muffled, every shadow too long. The threshold had formed, and now it waited. No orders were given, yet preparation began. A joint mission team, an uneasy alliance of soldiers, scientists, and translators, was assembled from what remained of the UEDC's highest priority units. Volunteers only. No one was forced to enter the spiral. But those who came forward shared a common trait. Not bravery, but curiosity. A hunger that overcame fear. Men and women who had seen the patterns, who had dreamed in spirals, who felt the pull like gravity in their bones. They did not speak of glory. They spoke of answers. Among them, Solène Marchand, still pale and glassy-eyed, the glyphs now faintly visible under her skin like glowing veins. Colonel El-Khatib, slower now, haunted, yet tethered by duty. A Namibian geophysicist whose sleep had been filled with maps of cities that never existed. A Zambian orphan who could replicate cognosphere patterns in sand with her fingers. 7 in total. Not a team, a delegation, sent not to command, but to witness. Their descent began at dawn. The spiral path swallowed them whole in silence. The inside of the gate was not a tunnel. It was a transition. The further they moved downward, the less real the environment became in human terms. Walls didn't curve, they unfolded. Light didn't shine, it spoke. Space grew recursive, as if the path was doubling back on itself, not in distance, but in meaning. Every footstep felt like walking into memory, not their own, but the world's. Beneath the 5th turn, the material changed. No longer soil or stone. The floor became smooth, black, and semi-reflective, like standing on the surface of an ocean frozen mid-thought. Their lights didn't reflect, they rippled. Every noise echoed forever downward, as if time itself stretched thin. Gravity weakened, breathing slowed, and in the center of this space, a dome miles wide, suspended in absolute stillness. Inside the dome, the heart. It was larger now, fully opened. Its petals, or plates, or thoughts, had spread into a perfect, rotating shell of symbols and motion. The flame-shaped core at its center pulsed with rhythm, like a metronome for an entire species. And in that rhythm, the delegation felt, not through eyes or ears, but through presence. A pressure behind the eyes, a weight in the spine, a knowing that didn't require language. This was not a machine. This was the memory of Earth's previous lives. Visions came unbidden, not as hallucinations, but as history. The first recall, a species before man, tall, luminous, living in crystalline harmony with the planet. Not gods, not aliens, just a predecessor. They had answered the spiral. They had ascended, and in doing so had left behind the seed for the next. That seed was humanity, and now our time had come, but it was not guaranteed. The recall was not a gift. It was an option, a test of maturity, of awareness. Each age of Earth had been offered the chance to step forward, to leave the prison of physical instinct and join a larger mind, a greater web of sentient planets and spiral-bound worlds. Some had declined, some had failed. Others had tried to force the process and were erased, not by punishment, but by incompatibility. A body not ready for fire burns from within. And now, as the core pulsed, the 7 humans stood still, waiting. The question came, not in words, but in form. The spiral around them changed, shifting from memory to mirror, reflecting their fears, their hopes, their flaws. Humanity laid bare in its fullness. Our beauty, our violence, our art, our hunger, our failure. Images of Auschwitz and moon landings, of oil spills and symphonies, every contradiction rendered in living pattern. And then the spiral stopped. The cognosphere above, still synced with the core, pulsed with the final glyph. Do you accept the cost of knowing? Solène fell to her knees. El-Khatib gripped his chest. not in pain, but in awe. The rest said nothing. There was no vote, no discussion, only understanding, because beneath the fear, beneath the enormity, came clarity. The saucer had not come to judge. It had come to ask. And now Earth waited for an answer not in words, but in will. The delegation stepped forward. The threshold flared. And above, in the skies, the saucer brightened once more. They did not speak. No word was uttered. No hand was raised. But something passed between them. 7 human beings at the foot of a structure not built by tools, but by truth. In that sacred stillness, under a dome that breathed with the memory of worlds long gone, they answered not with language but with presence, with being. The step forward was enough. That one movement echoed through the spiral, igniting a response not from the structure itself, but from the planet. A sound low, pure, ancient, resonated through the chamber. Not heard, but felt down to the marrow. The walls lit up not with symbols this time, but with motion. Spiral within spiral, worlds turning within thought, memory coiling around potential. The cognosphere above the surface pulsed in tandem, firing beams of data into the sky, connecting with every other cognosphere node across the globe in a spiderweb of radiant energy. Cities still holding on, Cairo, Delhi, Brasilia, fragments of shattered Paris. Watched the sky shimmer with white light as a signal was born, passed, multiplied. Humanity's answer had not just been received. It was acknowledged. And for the first time since the saucer appeared, it moved with purpose. Its spiral iris widened once again, no longer a question mark hanging over the world, but a vessel in transition. Plates along its underbelly realigned into concentric rings, each glowing with lines of white fire, until the entire structure resembled an eye turned inward. Above Kimberley, the clouds parted in a perfect circle, exposing stars where the sun should have been, and the entire sky seemed to tilt, as though the universe itself were reorienting around this one moment. And then release. The heart within the chamber detonated in silence. Not an explosion, not destruction, but dispersal. The flame at its center unraveled into millions of spiraling filaments, each thread a memory, a code, a possibility. They did not burn. They carried, through stone, through air, through mind. Across the African continent and beyond, sleepers woke in tears. Machines froze mid-cycle. Rivers pulsed with new mineral traces. Forests bloomed in spirals. It was not just the chamber that had opened, it was the world. And in that expansion, something else rose them. The ones who came before. Not in flesh, not in ship, not even in vision, but in echo. The dome flickered with images of luminous beings. Tall, faceless, robed in movement and breath. They stood in silence around the 7 humans. Not threatening, not godlike, but familiar. Not ancestors, not masters, siblings, separated by epochs, by cycles of planetary awakening. They watched patiently, as if witnessing a child learning to stand. And when the final glyph bloomed around the chamber, "You are now remembered," they turned and faded into the spiraling walls. Above, the saucer responded one last time. From its underside, a thin, transparent veil extended downward like a curtain of light, enveloping the spiral crater and the mine, cocooning the region in a semi-permeable membrane that shimmered with impossible hues. The spiral scar on the Earth's surface transformed, lines of molten silver weaving through the rock, forming permanent patterns. This was no longer a battlefield. It was sanctum. In the silence that followed, every conflict stopped. Across the globe, weapons were lowered. Radars fell still. Submarines surfaced in surrender. For reasons no one could articulate, humanity could no longer bring itself to war. Even the most fractured commands, those still loyal to old flags and vengeance, could no longer justify the idea of killing, not when the Earth itself had answered a call they had never even known existed. One by one, the 7 humans emerged from the spiral, changed, not biologically, not visibly, but deepened. Each walked in silence, their eyes glazed with awe, their minds now threaded with memory not entirely their own. They had seen the truth. Earth was not a random accident, not a rock with life. It was part of a greater lattice of planets that carried life as archive. And when the spiral was complete, when a species reached the capacity to look inward without destroying itself, the call would be made. The recall would come. This was not the end of the invasion, because there had never been an invasion, only a test, a last chance to prove that within all the hatred, the scars, the ruin, humanity still remembered how to wonder. As they stepped into the sunlight, soldiers wept, not out of fear, not confusion, but out of hope, because now they knew the Earth was not alone, and we never had been. The spiral sealed itself on the seventh day, not with thunder or tremor, but with silence. The Earth exhaled as if a wound had closed, not from healing but from acceptance. The chamber beneath Kimberly dimmed, its once blazing patterns now faint scars of silver and ash that pulsed only faintly, like the embers of a dying star. No more light flowed from its core. The filament trails vanished. The luminous beings who had appeared in echoes did not return. The massive saucer, still anchored above South Africa like a sentinel, ceased movement entirely. Its spiral iris retracted, the plates folding inward like a steel flower returning to bud. And with it, the curtain of light surrounding the mine slowly dissipated, unraveling in soft ribbons into the wind. The recall was complete, but it had not vanished. It had changed us across the continent, and soon the planet's signs of alteration began to emerge, not in dramatic flashes or overnight miracles, but in the fine-grained particles of the everyday. Soil that once struggled to yield now birthed crops in fractal rows without planting. Rivers ran clear, carrying traces of mineral strands never cataloged before. Patterns emerged in migration, in storm formation, in human behavior. Cities that had suffered under years of siege and division reported a sudden calm. Riots ceased, ceasefires held, and for reasons no one could explain, people simply stopped needing to run. But the deeper change was internal. Those who had witnessed the spiral firsthand spoke rarely, and when they did, their words were slow, cautious, not out of secrecy but reverence. They described dreams too vivid to be dreams, visions of spiral cities orbiting distant stars, of cultures long extinguished whose languages now lived again in fragments within their minds. They heard frequencies in silence. They began to draw without instruction, build without blueprints, move in rhythms that mimicked celestial motion. And the Earth itself responded. It became alive. Satellite scans revealed that the magnetic poles had subtly shifted, not violently, but intentionally. Not a flip, but an alignment. The auroras expanded, now visible as far south as the equator, shimmering in geometric flows. Glaciers stopped melting, but not because of temperature. Something in their molecular structure had recrystallized. Scientists had no words for it. Only one phrase kept appearing in reports, logs, and hastily scribbled field notes. Resonance is real. The saucer remained, motionless, watching, a global council, an emergency union of old rivals, allies, broken nations, formed not to command, but to listen. They did not issue ultimatums to the craft. There were no broadcasts, no threats, no declarations of ownership. They knew now that it did not recognize borders, languages, armies. It was not a ship. It was an arc of memory. Its purpose was not conquest, but curation. And now that Earth had responded, it was waiting again. For what no one could say. There were theories. Some believed a second recall was imminent, that more ships would come, bearing other offers, other spiral paths. Others believed this was the end, that Earth had passed its trial, and would now be left to grow, unburdened by observation. A third, quieter belief emerged too, that this was not a test Earth had passed, but one it had barely survived. That humanity had been deemed not yet ready, but worth keeping. Probationary spark, a seed permitted to remain. Within the 7, strange changes took root. Solen Marchand stopped eating entirely, yet never weakened. Colonel El-Khatib could now speak spiral glyphs aloud, and the air shimmered faintly when he did. The child from Lusaka began to hum tones that caused lights to flicker. Medical teams could not explain it. Scanners failed to categorize their blood. Their EG patterns showed synchronized waves. They were no longer fully human in the biological sense. They were interfaces between what we had been and what might come next. And through them, the planet continued to speak. In the final hours of the seventh day, something happened in the skies over every major population center. No sound, no light, but for exactly 30 seconds, the clouds above each city parted in perfect spirals. And within that opening, for one breathless half-minute, the stars aligned in patterns that did not match any known constellation. And then the saucer moved, not violently, not suddenly. It simply began to rise. No sound, no wind, no engine. The spiral iris at its base spun once, as if imprinting the last signature of Earth's mind into its memory. And then, like breath reversing, it lifted, not into the atmosphere, but away, bending gravity, light, sound, as though folding through the seams of space itself. It did not fly, it departed, leaving behind no message, no artifact, only stillness, and the knowledge that we had been seen. The Earth remained, but now it was something more. It was not just a planet, it was a participant. It did not end with a bang, nor a broadcast, nor a banner waving above nations reunited. No parades marched, no hymns were sung, no final war was fought. The saucer left, and in doing so, it took with it the weight of a question we hadn't known we'd been carrying. Are we alone? The answer was no. We never were. And now, even in its absence, the evidence remained, etched into soil, echoing in weather, felt in the minds of those who had stood closest to the spiral's breath. The Earth had been changed, but more importantly, it had been acknowledged. In the days and weeks that followed, humanity did not leap forward into some golden age. There were no flying cities, no cure-all gifts, no alien machines left behind for study. The world still limped, its wounds not erased by revelation. There were still borders, still hunger, still grief. But something fundamental had shifted in our trajectory. A threshold had been crossed, not in technology, but in knowing. A psychological realignment that rippled through the species like the tide turning beneath the moon. Across the African continent, the ground where the spiral once spun remained warm to the touch. The soil glowed faintly under moonlight and nothing would grow upon it. Not because the land was barren, but because it had become sacred. A memory plate. A reminder. People came not as tourists, but as pilgrims. To stand where the world had opened. To feel the gravity bend under their feet. And to remember the day the sky turned inward. Solène Marchand disappeared weeks later. No trace. No farewell. One morning, her quarters were found empty, her notebook left open, filled with spiral glyphs that no one could decipher. She had been among the first to understand that the recall was not just an event, it was a doorway. And some had already stepped through in ways we didn't yet comprehend. Colonel El-Khatib resigned soon after, returning to the desert to silence. He said he could no longer lead with conventional rank, that the world needed shepherds now, not generals. He built a listening station on the edge of the Namib, not with wires or satellites, but with stone and silence, waiting for a sound that might never come again. The others, each touched in different ways, drifted quietly into the new order of things. A new discipline emerged in science. Not astronomy, not theology, something between them. A study of patterns, of resonance, of invitational logic. Entire institutes formed around spiral cognition. Sleep research exploded in volume. Children across continents began to draw in curves before they learned the alphabet. And everywhere, buried in song, architecture, design, the spiral returned like a watermark printed into the human brain. But perhaps the most profound change was subtle. Humanity paused. Not for long, but long enough. For once, we did not rush to fill the silence left by an unknowable power with our own noise. For once, we did not turn the unexplained into a weapon. We sat with the not knowing. The scientists who stared at the spiral glyphs, the soldiers who looked up instead of forward, the children who sang songs no one had taught them. We waited, and in that stillness, something ancient stirred inside us, a memory of remembering. Not all accepted it. Some rejected the spiral outright, said it was manipulation, illusion, that nothing had truly changed. And to them, the world indeed remained the same, scarred, cynical, cold. But even in their defiance, they could not escape the new light in the sky. The strange dreams. The way the wind sometimes sounded like breathing. And through it all, the spiral remained. Etched into the earth. Etched into us. It did not demand obedience. It did not promise salvation. It only offered. The recall had come. And the planet had not failed. The saucer was gone, yes, but somewhere beyond our stars, beyond our story, it carried us. A record, an answer, and a promise that when the time came again, when we were ready for the next question, the spiral would return.